Hello, I am the Wizard of Tales, and I'm here to guide you today. I know this video is the perfect companion to help my dear dreamers relax and drift off to sleep. Before we dive into a world of calm and serenity, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Now, get cozy, take a deep breath, and let the magic of stories embrace you. In the bustling streets of Agrabah, where the intense sun turned the sand into a golden carpet, Aladdin leapt nimbly between the market stalls. His bare feet already knew every stone and every shortcut in the city that was both his home and his playground. With his shaggy black hair and threadbare clothes, he might have looked like just another young beggar to the hurried shopkeepers. But his charismatic smile and sparkling eyes revealed a different soul. "Catch thief!" The cry echoed through the market as Aladdin, with a loaf of newly acquired bread under his arm, deftly dodged the crowd. Beside him, his faithful companion Abu, a small brown-furred monkey, chirped excitedly, also carrying his share of the booty. "It's not stealing to survive, is it, Abu?" Aladdin winked at his furry friend as he dodged down a narrow alleyway. The furious vendor lagged behind, shaking his fists in the air. For Aladdin, every day was a new adventure on the streets of Agrabah, even if not always for the noblest of reasons. At the same moment, inside the majestic palace that towered over the city like a glittering jewel, Princess Jasmine watched the horizon from her golden balcony. Her long black hair danced in the brief desert breeze, while her pet tiger, Raja, rested lazily at her feet. The princess sighed, bored with the walls that imprisoned her and the rules that dictated her life. "Another suitor today, Raja," she murmured, stroking the tiger's head. "Another arrogant prince who only sees a crown, not a person." The animal growled in sympathy. The laws of the kingdom were clear. Jasmine had to marry a prince before her next birthday, which was fast approaching. Meanwhile, in the depths of the palace, Grand Vizier Jafar was plodding in his gloomy office. Tall and slender, with his black and red robes and snake-shaped staff, he was the embodiment of ambition. Next to him, Iago, his sarcastic red parrot, watched as the vizier consulted ancient scrolls. "The lamp must be somewhere, Iago," Jafar muttered, his black eyes shining with malice. "And when I find it, not even the Sultan can stand in the way of my destiny to rule Agrabah." His obsession with the legendary magic lamp grew by the day, as did his plans to usurp the throne. Back on the streets, Aladdin finally reached his refuge, an abandoned building at the top of the city with a privileged view of the palace. Sharing his bread with Abu, he watched the sun set over the golden domes. "Look at that, Abu," he said, pointing to the palace. "People with so much, while others have so little." The monkey nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "One day, friend, things will be different. One day we'll live in a palace, have servants and treasures." His reverie was interrupted by a commotion in the streets below. A new prince was arriving to woo the princess, his extravagant entourage pushing people out of the way. Aladdin watched with disgust at the display of arrogance. The next day, Aladdin was again in the market streets when he saw something that would change his life forever. A little girl was crying after a cruel shopkeeper snatched an apple from her hands. Without thinking twice, Aladdin grabbed an apple from another stall and handed it to the little girl, who smiled gratefully before running off. It was at that moment that he saw her, a young woman of extraordinary beauty, watching the scene with approval. Jasmine had escaped from the palace disguised in simple clothes, determined to experience life beyond the royal walls. Their gazes met, and something inexplicable passed between them. Before Aladdin could approach, palace guards appeared, searching for the missing princess. In the ensuing confusion, a mysterious old man approached Aladdin, whispering about a magical cave in the desert and a treasure that could change his life. "Only someone with a pure heart can enter the Cave of Wonders," said the old man, who was actually Jafar in disguise. "Someone like you, young man." Aladdin, still thinking about the mysterious market girl and dreaming of a better life, didn't notice the malice in the old man's eyes. He accepted the proposal, unaware that he was about to be involved in an adventure far greater than he could have imagined. That night, as the moon illuminated the desert dunes, Aladdin and Abu followed the mysterious old man out of the city. The Cave of Wonders appeared out of the sand like an apparition, the head of an enormous tiger with eyes as bright as rubies. "Remember," warned the old man, "bring me only the lamp. All the rest of the treasure you find will be yours." His words were honey, but they hid poison. Aladdin looked at Abu, who was clinging nervously to his shoulder. "Well, friend, what could possibly go wrong?" He smiled, trying to hide his own apprehension. With a determined step, he crossed the fangs of the cave, descending into the mysterious depths that would change his fate forever. What he didn't know was that that night would mark the beginning of a journey that would test not only his courage, but also his character. A story where he would discover that true riches don't always shine the brightest, and that love can be found in the most unexpected places. Meanwhile, above the city, Princess Jasmine was also thinking about the kind young man she had met in the market, without imagining that their paths were about to cross in ways that neither of them could have foreseen. The darkness of the Cave of Wonders engulfed Aladdin and Abu as they descended a long stone staircase. The young man held a torch that the mysterious old man had given him, its dancing flames casting sinister shadows on the ancient walls. Abu clung tightly to his friend's shoulder, his small eyes wide with apprehension. "Calm down, Abu," whispered Aladdin, trying to sound more confident than he really felt. "Think of all the treasures we could find down here. We'll never have to steal to eat again." As they advanced, the cave opened up into a gigantic chamber that took Aladdin's breath away. Mountains of gold, jewels, and precious artifacts stretched as far as the eye could see, shining like earthly stars in the light of his torch. Abu immediately jumped off Aladdin's shoulder, mesmerized by an enormous ruby the size of an orange. "Abu, no," Aladdin warned, remembering the old man's warning. "We can only touch the lamp, remember?" The monkey pouted, but reluctantly moved away from the tempting jewel. As they crossed the sea of riches, Aladdin couldn't help thinking about the girl in the market. With all that wealth, perhaps he could impress her, offer her a life of comfort and luxury. His thoughts were interrupted when something caught his eye, an ornate carpet floating a few centimeters above the ground. "Abu, do you see that?" Aladdin rubbed his eyes in disbelief. The carpet, realizing it had been noticed, waved one of its tassels as if greeting the visitors. "It's a flying carpet, a magic carpet." The carpet approached gracefully, making a theatrical bow that drew laughter from Aladdin. Abu, initially frightened, soon found himself fascinated by his new magical companion. The carpet began to make animated gestures, as if it wanted to show them something. "Do you know where the lamp is?" asked Aladdin. The carpet nodded vigorously and began to float towards a distant staircase. "Good. Show me the way, friend." Outside the cave, Jafar maintained his elder disguise, but his patience was beginning to wear thin. "That brat is taking too long," he grumbled to Iago, who was hiding in his robes. "The lamp should be in my hands before dawn." Back inside the cave, Aladdin, Abu, and their new magical friend reached an isolated chamber. In the center, on a high stone pedestal, rested an old, unadorned bronze lamp. Mysterious rays of light converged on it, as if the whole place had been built to protect this simple object. "All this way, for that old lamp," Aladdin commented, carefully climbing the steps of the pedestal. Abu made a sound of disappointment, clearly more interested in the treasures they had left behind. When Aladdin finally picked up the lamp, a strange sensation ran through his body, as if he were holding something alive and pulsating. Before he could examine his discovery further, a high-pitched scream echoed through the chamber. Abu had succumbed to temptation and grabbed a huge red jewel. The ground began to shake violently, and a thunderous voice reverberated throughout the cave. "You have perverted the forbidden treasure. Now you will suffer the consequences." "Abu, what have you done?" Aladdin shouted, as the walls began to crumble and bubbling lava gushed out of the ground. The flying carpet quickly glided towards them, offering an escape route. The desperate escape through the collapsing cave was a blur of movement and chaos. The carpet zigzagged between collapsing pillars and jets of lava, while Aladdin clung tightly to the lamp with one hand and Abu with the other. Behind them, a veritable tsunami of treasure and destruction was chasing them. "I can see the way out," Aladdin shouted hopefully, spotting moonlight through the cave's fangs. However, a giant rock came crashing down on the carpet, throwing them into a wall. Aladdin managed to cling to a rocky ledge, but was rapidly losing strength. Up above, the old man held out his wrinkled hand. "Quickly, young man, give me the lamp, and I'll pull you up. Hang on up," Aladdin shouted, trying to reach the outstretched hand while protecting his furry friend. With a lot of effort, he managed to hand the lamp to the old man, who immediately changed his worried expression to one of evil triumph. "Finally," Jafar exclaimed, his voice returning to normal as he ripped off his disguise. "After all these years, you," Aladdin gasped, recognizing the dreaded vizier of the palace. Before he could react, Jafar stepped on his toes with force. "Your reward for your services," he laughed cruelly, watching Aladdin and Abu plummet into the darkness of the collapsing cave. The flying carpet dived after them, tried to catch up, but it was too late. The last thing Aladdin saw before losing consciousness was Jafar's triumphant face disappearing as the cave entrance closed forever, sealing them in the dark depths. Hours passed before Aladdin regained consciousness. He was lying in a small natural cave, dimly lit by phosphorescent crystals on the walls. Abu and the flying carpet were beside him, the monkey anxiously trying to wake him up. "I'm fine, Abu," Aladdin groaned, slowly sitting up. "But we're stuck down here." His gaze wandered around the cave until he noticed something glowing in a corner. The lamp. Apparently, during the confusion, Abu had managed to steal it back from Jafar. "You're amazing, you know that?" Aladdin laughed, hugging his little friend. Picking up the lamp, he noticed an almost faded inscription on its surface. "There's something written here, but it's very dirty." He began to rub the lamp with the sleeve of his robe, without imagining that this simple gesture was about to change his life forever. The lamp began to shake in his hands, emanating a bright blue light. Colored smoke poured out of the nozzle, filling the small cave as a powerful, jovial voice echoed. "A year, 10,000 years can give you quite a Kate." The blue smoke gradually solidified into the shape of a colossal, imposing figure with bright blue skin and a small black tuft on his head. The genius, as he introduced himself with a theatrical bow, filled the small cave with his magnetic presence and exuberant personality. "Wow, wow, wow! Look what we have here!" the genie exclaimed, materializing several spotlights that illuminated Aladdin. "My new master, allow me to introduce myself properly." With a snap of his fingers, a lively tune began to play out of nowhere, as the genie multiplied into several versions of himself, each with a different instrument. Aladdin and Abu watched in amazement as the genie performed a musical number explaining the rules of the 3 wishes. Rule number 1, I can't kill anyone. Rule number 2, I can't make anyone fall in love. And rule number 3, I can't bring anyone back from the dead. Other than that, just ask. 3 wishes? Aladdin asked, still trying to process the surreal situation. Anything? Well, there are some limitations, as I mentioned in the song, which by the way was sensational, don't you think? The genie winked, prompting a small audience of applause. But yes, practically anything. Riches, fame, power. Although I'd always suggest starting with getting out of this cave, considering the circumstances. Aladdin smiled cunningly. What if I don't use a wish to get out of here? What if you take us out of the goodness of your heart? The genie was momentarily speechless before bursting into laughter. "Ah, that's clever. It's been a long time since I've met a master with a sense of humor. But okay, you win, kid. I'll get you out of here for free, as a courtesy to the house." With one dramatic movement, the genie transformed into a rocket, grabbed Aladdin, Abu, and the carpet, and shot through the ceiling of the cave, punching through layers and layers of rock until they emerged in an oasis in the middle of the desert, under the starry sky. "And here we are," announced the genie, returning to his original form. "Now about those 3 wishes." Aladdin sat on the edge of a small pond, thinking deeply. the image of the mysterious market girl, who he still didn't know was Princess Jasmine, danced in his mind. "Genie, have you ever fallen in love?" The question took the magical being by surprise. His usually playful expression softened. "Well, in 10,000 years you end up seeing a lot of love pass by. But personally, let's just say it's hard to maintain a relationship when you live in a lab. There's this girl," Aladdin began, and the genie immediately transformed into a therapist with glasses and a notepad. "She's amazing, but she's a princess, and the law says she can only marry a prince." "Ah, the classic forbidden love dilemma," Genie exclaimed dramatically. "You know, there's a very obvious solution to that." He snapped his fingers, and suddenly Aladdin found himself dressed in luxurious royal clothes. "Can you turn me into a prince?" Aladdin's eyes lit up at the possibility. "I can turn you into anything you want, boy. Prince, king, emperor, even a movie critic, although I wouldn't recommend the last option." The genie joked, making royal poses. Aladdin stood up, excited. "So, Genie, I wish you to turn me into the richest and most powerful Prince Agrabah has ever seen." "Your wishes are my orders, master." With a grand gesture, the genie began to weave his magic. Rays of colored light enveloped Aladdin, transforming his shabby clothes into a white and gold costume worthy of royalty. Abu was transformed into an elegant elephant, while magical fireworks exploded in the night sky. "Presenting," announced the genie in an announcer's voice, "His Royal Highness, Prince Ali Ababwa." Meanwhile, in the palace, Jafar was furious. His frantic search for the lamp in his chambers had yielded no results. "That miserable monkey must have stolen it," he vociferated, knocking objects off his desk. "Maybe it's time to change tack," suggested Iado, his parrot. "The princess still has to get married before the next sunset." Jafar's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Yes, perhaps it's time to convince the Sultan to see things my way." His snake-shaped staff began to glow ominously. The next morning, Agrabah awoke to an unprecedented spectacle. A grand procession was crossing the city streets, led by a young prince on a majestic white elephant. Dancers, musicians, and servants handed out gold coins to the amazed populace. The genie, disguised as a royal advisor, enthusiastically coordinated the show, occasionally transforming himself into different people in the crowd to start chants of Prince Ali. "Magnificent is he, Ali Ababwa." At the palace, Jasmine watched the procession from her balcony with disinterest. "Just another arrogant prince," she sighed to Raja. However, there was something familiar about that young man that she couldn't quite identify. Aladdin, or Prince Ali, felt his heart racing as he approached the palace. Under all that luxury and pomp, he was still the same boy from the streets, dreaming of winning the heart of a princess. What he didn't know was that his journey of self-discovery had only just begun, and that the greatest lessons about love, honesty, and courage were yet to come. The big question on his mind was, how long could he keep up the charade? And more importantly, when the truth came out, would his true self be enough to win not just the kingdom, but the heart of a princess? The great hall of the palace shone with sunlight through the colorful stained glass windows when Prince Ali was introduced to the Sultan. The chubby, good-natured ruler was immediately charmed by the young visitor, especially after Aladdin presented him with a golden mechanical watch that the genie had conjured up. "Extraordinary, simply extraordinary," exclaimed the Sultan, examining the gift with sparkling eyes. "You must know my daughter, Jasmine. She's not interested." Jasmine's firm voice echoed through the hall as she entered, her tiger Raja following her faithfully. Her eyes met Aladdin's, and for a moment, something familiar seemed to pass between them. Jafar watched the scene from the shadows, his fingers gripping his staff with increasing strength. "Just another insignificant prince," he muttered to Yado. "But there's something about him that bothers me." Determined to impress the princess, Aladdin approached with an elegant bow. "Your Highness, I know you must be tired of suitors, but I ask only for a chance to prove myself." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the unusual humility in his words. "And how do you intend to do that, Prince Ali?" With a confident smile, Aladdin held out his hand. "How about a walk? I promise to show you a whole new perspective of Agrabah." The magic carpet was waiting on the palace balcony, disguised as an ordinary carpet. When Jasmine hesitantly accepted Aladdin's hand and climbed onto it, her eyes widened in surprise as she watched him gently levitate. "Trust me," whispered Aladdin, words that echoed a distant memory in Jasmine's mind. The carpet took off smoothly, carrying them beyond the palace walls. The city stretched out below them like a living map, the streets winding between the buildings like golden rivers under the setting sun. Jasmine couldn't contain her admiration, her fingers entwined firmly in Aladdin's. "It's incredible," she sighed as they flew over the rooftops where, unbeknownst to her, Aladdin used to sleep. "I've never seen Agrabah like this." As they flew, Aladdin began to show a surprisingly intimate knowledge of the city and its people. He pointed to a small square where children played, told stories about the market traders, and shared secrets that only someone who lived on the streets could know. "How do you know so much about the lives of ordinary people?" Jasmine asked, her curiosity growing. Aladdin hesitated, his heart torn between the truth and the need to maintain his charade. "I believe that a true leader must know all aspects of his kingdom, not just the palaces." As night fell, they landed on a distant rooftop, sharing a simple meal that genius had discreetly provided. The stars began to dot the dark sky, and conversation flowed naturally between them. "You know," said Jasmine, "you're different from the other princes. There's something about you that reminds me of—" She stopped, studying his face more closely. Aladdin's heart raced. "Reminds you of what?" "Someone I met at the market," she replied slowly. "A young man who helped a child in need." Before Aladdin could reply, an eerie glow caught his eye. In the palace, red lights emanated from the tower where Jaffar's chambers were located. The vizier was busy with his own plot. "The staff is almost ready, Iago," Jafar muttered, adding ingredients to a bubbling cauldron. "Soon, its hypnotic power will be strong enough to control even the Sultan." Back on the roof, Jasmine and Aladdin shared a moment of contemplative silence. "Ali," she finally said, "sometimes I feel like I'm trapped in a life I didn't choose. Do you understand that?" Aladdin felt the weight of his own lie. "More than you know," he replied softly. "Sometimes appearances can be deceiving." When they returned to the palace, something had changed between them. Jasmine no longer saw just a suitor, but someone who seemed to truly understand her. And Aladdin, despite the guilt growing in his chest, was more in love than ever. The genie, who watched discreetly as he became a star in the sky, sighed, "Ah, young love, so beautiful and so complicated." That night, as Aladdin walked through the palace gardens, lost in thought about Jasmine, a shadow moved in the darkness. Jafar emerged from the bushes, his staff glowing menacingly. "Impressive demonstration, Prince Ali," he said with false cordiality. "Or should I say, Aladdin?" Aladdin's blood ran cold in his veins. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but you do." Jafar smiled mischievously. "The street rat I found in the Cave of Wonders. I wonder what the princess would say if she knew the truth about her precious prince." Aladdin kept his composure, even though his heart was pounding frantically. "Your accusations are as empty as your loyalty to the Sultan." Jafar's smile only widened. "Be careful, boy. You're not the only one with secrets in this palace." With those words, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving Aladdin with an even heavier burden on his heart. In his makeshift room, Aladdin found the genie playing chess with himself. "Genie, what do I do? I can't keep lying to her." The genie paused his game, looking seriously at his friend. "The truth is a funny way of coming out, Al. The longer you wait, the more painful it will be." But before Aladdin could consider a confession, a guard rushed into his chambers. "Prince Ali, the Sultan requests your immediate presence in the throne room." "It's about the princess." Aladdin's heart raced as he ran through the palace corridors. As he entered the throne room, he found a disturbing scene. The Sultan was in a trance, his glazed eyes fixed on the red glow of Jafar's staff. Jasmine was handcuffed, guards holding her tightly as she struggled. "Ah, Prince Ali, how nice of you to join us." Jafar smiled mischievously. "Or should I say, the street rat? Dad, wake up. Jafar is controlling you." Jasmine shouted, but the Sultan remained motionless. The Sultan has seen the truth about his favorite suitor, Jafar proclaimed, his voice echoing through the hall. A liar, a common thief who dared to pass himself off as royalty. It's a lie, Aladdin advanced, but guards quickly surrounded him. Abu, still in elephant form, tried to help, but Jafar turned him back into a small monkey with a flick of his staff. The magic, Jasmine gasped, realizing. So you're not really a prince? The look of disappointment in Jasmine's eyes went through Aladdin like a dagger. Jasmine, I can explain. Guards, Jafar ordered, take this impostor to the dungeons. The sentence for deceiving the royal family is death at dawn. As he was dragged away, Aladdin saw the genie floating invisibly near the ceiling, his expression anguished. He could use his second wish to escape, but that would mean leaving Jasmine and the kingdom in Jafar's hands. In the dungeons, chained to the cold wall, Aladdin finally let the weight of his lies fall on his shoulders. Abu snuggled up next to him, trying to comfort him. I've ruined everything, Abu, he whispered. I should have told you the truth from the start. A familiar blue glow filled the cell as the genie appeared. It's not over yet, Al. You still have 2 wishes? What kind of person would I be if I used magic to solve my problems again? Aladdin replied bitterly. That's how this mess started. Sometimes, Al, the real magic isn't in the wishes, but in what we do with them, the genie said wisely. Just then, the magic carpet slid through the bars of the cell window, bringing with it a surprise. Jasmine, you have 1 minute to explain everything to me, she said firmly, her eyes shining with a mixture of anger and hope. The truth is, I'm just Aladdin, a thief of the streets, he confessed, finally setting his heart free. I found a magic lamp, and the genie turned me into a prince because I wanted to be worthy of you. But I realized too late that true nobility doesn't come from titles or wealth. The boy from the market, Jasmine whispered, the pieces falling into place. It was you all along. Before they could continue, they heard footsteps approaching. Jafar is using dark magic to control your father, Aladdin explained quickly. He wants the throne for himself. And I have proof. The genie appeared, transformed into a detective with a magnifying glass. That chatty parrot of his can't keep a secret. Jasmine nodded determinedly. We need to stop him. But how? I have a plan. Aladdin smiled, his old adventurous spirit returning. But it will require all of us to work together. In the throne room, Jafar savored his imminent triumph, forcing the hypnotized sultan to sign decrees that would make him the new ruler. Iago flew around in circles, humming about his future as a royal parrot. Suddenly, the doors opened. Jasmine walked in, seemingly submissive. You win, Jafar. I agree to marry you. Excellent choice, princess. Jafar smiled victoriously, not noticing the magic carpet gliding silently behind him. Meanwhile, Aladdin, freed by one of the genie's tricks, was sneaking around the pillars of the hole. The plan was simple: distract Jafar long enough to break his staff, the source of his hypnotic power. But before the wedding, Jasmine continued, approaching seductively. Wouldn't you like to see how you look with the crown? Jafar's ego couldn't resist the temptation. When he reached out to take the crown Jasmine offered, Aladdin jumped up, grabbing the staff. Jafar roared, his mask of sophistication falling away completely. In the ensuing struggle, the staff slipped out of both their hands, shattering as it hit the ground. A wave of magical energy swept through the hole, releasing the Sultan from his trance. Guards, arrest the traitor, the Sultan ordered, finally aware of Jafar's treachery. But Jafar had one last card. If I can't take the throne by cunning, I'll take it by force. He pulled out the lamp he had stolen from Aladdin during the confusion. Genie, my first wish. Make me the most powerful being in the world. Aladdin shouted, but it was too late. The genie, forced to obey, transformed Jafar into an all-powerful sorcerer. The vizier grew to the ceiling, his black robes turning into gloomy smoke. Now, let's see who the real ruler of Agrabah is. Jafar thundered, launching bolts of energy that turned everything they touched into black gold. In the midst of the chaos, Aladdin realized something crucial. "Jasmine," he shouted over the roar of magic. "Do you trust me?" Their eyes met through the magical storm, and in that moment, all lies and disguises disappeared. "I do," she replied. "Then hold on tight." Aladdin whistled, and the magic carpet caught them in mid-flight, dodging Jaffar's attacks as they executed the final part of the plan. "Why are you running away from me?" Jafar roared. "I'm the most powerful being in the world." "Almost that," Aladdin teased. "The genie is even more powerful. He gave you your powers, and he can take them away." Jafar's eyes shone with understanding and greed. "Yes, yes, genie, my second wish. Make me an old, powerful genie." The genie covered his eyes, not wanting to see, but compelled to fulfill the wish. Jafar began to transform, his body growing and changing until he became a colossal red genie. "The power, the absolute power," Jafar laughed, not noticing the black lamp that materialized at his feet, nor the golden chains that began to bind his wrists. "You forgot something, Jafar," Aladdin shouted. "Geniuses have a lot of power, but zero freedom." "No," Jafar shouted when he realized the trap, being sucked into his own lamp along with Iago, would try to escape too late. With Jafar defeated, peace returned to the palace. The Sultan, impressed by Aladdin's bravery and intelligence, declared that the law was wrong. His daughter should have the right to marry whomever her heart chose. "And now?" Jasmine asked, entwining her fingers in Aladdin's. "Now," he smiled, picking up the genie's lamp, "there's one more thing I need to do." Turning to his blue friend, he declared, "Genie, I wish you freedom." With a flash of light and the sound of chains breaking, the genie's bracelets fell off, and his smoke-shaped legs turned into real feet. For the first time in millennia, he was truly free. "Ow," the genie smiled, tears in his eyes. "You are a true prince, not by magic or title, but by your heart." And so, under the starry sky of Agrabah, Aladdin and Jasmine discovered that true love doesn't need disguises or magical wishes, just the courage to be who you really are. In the small village of Vale das Sombras, where stone and wooden houses huddled together on the steep slopes of the mountains, lived the Silva family. João and Maria Silva already had 6 children to feed when they found out that a 7th was on the way. The news, which should have brought joy, brought tears to Maria's tired eyes as she looked at the increasingly empty pantry and the hungry faces of her little ones. The winter that year was particularly cruel. The biting wind whistled through the gaps in the poorly sealed windows, and snow covered the fields where John used to work as a farmer. Maria's belly grew with the couple's worry. The older children started skipping meals, saying they weren't hungry so that the younger ones could eat a bit more. The night the baby decided to come into the world, a storm was lashing the village. The local midwife, Dona Rosa, arrived soaking wet at the Silva home, bringing with her herbs and knowledge passed down from generation to generation. The labor was long and difficult, and when the newborn's cry finally echoed through the house, something strange happened. A tall, slender figure materialized in the room. Its black cloak seemed to be made of living shadows, and where there should have been a face, there was only deep darkness. John and Mary were paralyzed with fear, but death, for it was death itself, raised its hands in a gesture of peace. "Fear not," her voice was surprisingly soft, like the rustling of dry leaves in the wind. "I have come with a proposal. I see the suffering of this family, the daily struggle for survival. Let me be this child's godmother." Maria, still weak from childbirth, clutched the baby to her chest. "Why would death want to be a child's godmother?" she asked in a trembling voice. "Because I am the fairest of godmothers," replied the shadowy figure. "Rich or poor, young or old, all are equal to me. And to my godson, I will give a special gift. He will be able to see when I am present with the sick. If he sees me at the bedside, death is certain. If he's at my feet, there's a chance of a cure." John and Mary looked at each other. The offer was tempting. Having death as a godmother would mean protection and a valuable gift that could lift the family out of poverty. After a moment of tense silence, they agreed. The baby was christened Miguel, and death kept his promise. As he grew up, the boy showed a special sensitivity to the sick and needy. At the age of 12, he was already helping Dona Rosa with her healing work, showing a natural talent for medicine. Miguel grew up observing the suffering around him. He saw his older brothers leaving one by one to look for work in larger villages, while the younger ones continued to struggle against daily hunger. His gift, initially a family secret, began to manifest itself more clearly when he reached adolescence. The first time she saw her godmother with a sick person was when she was 15. A child in the village had a high fever, and when Miguel entered the room, he saw the shadowy figure standing at the foot of the bed. Following his instinct, he prepared a tea with the herbs Dona Rosa had taught him, and in a few days the child was cured. Her fame began to spread. People whispered about the young healer, who seemed to know exactly who could be saved and who was doomed. Miguel never revealed the true source of his knowledge, but used his gift to help everyone he could. Years passed, and Miguel became a respected doctor, studying in a larger city thanks to the money he managed to make from his cures. His success allowed him to help his family, and the Silva household finally saw better days. However, his gift also carried an enormous weight. Seeing death regularly and knowing that, in some cases, nothing could be done was a heavy burden to carry. It was at this time that he met Anna, a young teacher who had arrived in the Valley of Shadows to teach at the small local school. Her smile brightened the darkest days, and for the first time Miguel felt that his heart beat for something other than medicine. Anna also fell for the kind and dedicated doctor, and soon the two were in love. But fate, or perhaps his godmother, had other plans. One rainy afternoon, Anna started coughing up blood. Miguel rushed to examine her, and his heart froze when he saw the familiar figure of his godmother standing at her bedside. At that moment, he realized that he would be tested in a way he had never imagined. He would have to choose between respecting the pact with death or trying to save the love of his life. The decision he would make would change not only his fate, but also his understanding of life, death, and the limits of love. The young doctor who grew up under death's protection was about to discover that some gifts come with a very high price, and that some rules are not meant to be broken. Miguel spent days and nights by Anna's side, desperately searching for a way to save her. The cough persisted, and red spots began to appear on her handkerchiefs with increasing frequency. His medical knowledge indicated tuberculosis, a disease that had claimed so many lives in the Valley of Shadows. In her desperation, she began researching alternative treatments, consulting every book she could find. The nights were long, lit only by flickering candlelight as he leafed through the yellowed pages of ancient medical grimoires. Anna, though weakened, kept her gentle smile, trying to comfort Miguel in his moments of anguish. "You need to rest," she said in a hoarse voice between bouts of coughing. "You can't look after others if you don't look after yourself." But Miguel barely listened, consumed by his obsessive search for a cure. During his vigils, the constant presence of his godmother at Anna's bedside tormented him. The shadowy figure remained motionless, like a statue of darkness, silently reminding him of the pact they had made. Sometimes Miguel thought he saw a glimmer of compassion in the depths of the black hood, but perhaps it was just his imagination desperate for comfort. The news of Anna's illness spread through the village, and soon the small house where she lived was filled with wild flowers and small gifts from the students who loved her so much. The children asked every day when their teacher would return to school, and their innocent voices were like daggers in Miguel's heart. It was on one of these afternoons, while watching a group of children leave more flowers on the doorstep, that Miguel had an idea. If he couldn't change Anna's fate through conventional medicine, perhaps he could deceive death itself. After all, his godmother had given him the gift of seeing her presence, but had never specified that he could not interfere with her position. Carefully, he began to work out his plan. During the following visits, he noticed that his godmother always appeared at the same time. When the sun was beginning to set, she studied the room thoroughly, memorizing every detail of the simple furniture: the dark wooden bed, the weathered bedside table, the old armchair where she spent her waking nights. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when Anna's breathing was more labored than usual, Miguel put his plan into action. With the help of two strong men from the village, he turned the bed 180 degrees so that the headboard and feet switched positions. His heart was racing as he waited for the sun to set. When death appeared, as he always did, Miguel felt a shiver run down his spine. For the first time since receiving his gift, he was consciously trying to deceive his godmother. The shadowy figure took up its usual position, but now, due to the new layout of the bed, it was at Anna's feet, not at the headboard. For a moment, Miguel believed that his plan had worked. Anna's breathing seemed to improve slightly, and a rosy color returned to her cheeks. However, the joy was short-lived. Death remained motionless for a few moments before slowly turning towards her. "My godson," her voice sounded colder than usual, like the biting winter wind. "Do you really believe you can fool me with such simple tricks?" Miguel felt his legs go weak. "Godmother," he pleaded, "I love you. I can't lose you." "Love is powerful," replied Death. "But there are laws that not even it can break. You of all people should understand that. Your gift was not granted so that you could defy the natural order of things." His godmother's words weighed on Miguel like a shroud. He knew she was right, but his heart refused to accept it. "There must be something I can do," he insisted, his voice trembling with emotion. Death remained silent for a long moment before replying. "There are always choices, my godson, but every choice has its price. Are you willing to pay whatever it takes to save her?" Miguel didn't hesitate. "Anything. Even your gift? Even our connection?" The question took him by surprise. His gift had defined his entire adult life, had allowed him to help hundreds of people, to lift his family out of poverty. It was a fundamental part of who he was. But as he looked at Anna, asleep and fragile in her bed, he knew he had no choice. "Yes," he replied firmly, "that's right." Death inclined his head slightly, in a gesture that could have been as much approval as regret. "Remember, my godson, that some choices cannot be undone, and some blessings, once renounced, never return." Miguel nodded, feeling the weight of his decision. What was about to happen would change his life forever, but if it meant saving Anna, he was willing to sacrifice everything. Night fell over the Valley of Shadows, and with it, Miguel and Anna's fate was about to be sealed in a way that neither of them could have imagined. The atmosphere in the room thickened as Death raised his skeletal hands towards Miguel. A dark mist began to form around him, and he felt an intense chill run through his body. It was as if something was being ripped from his soul, his gift, his connection to his godmother, dripping like water between his fingers. Anna began to breathe more easily, her color visibly improving as the process continued. Miguel, on the other hand, felt weaker and weaker, his legs barely able to support him. When he finally fell to his knees, the shadowy figure of his godmother had disappeared, and for the first time in years, he could no longer feel her presence. The next few days were a time of adjustment. Anna recovered completely, to the amazement of everyone in the village. Miguel, meanwhile, had to relearn how to be a doctor without his special gift. Every diagnosis was now a challenge, every treatment an uncertainty. He found himself studying even more, consulting colleagues, looking for signs and symptoms that had previously been obvious to him. News of his loss of skills spread quickly. Some patients, who had previously blindly trusted his judgment, started looking for other doctors. Miguel's pride suffered, but Anna's smile and constant presence helped him get through each difficult moment. "You saved me," she often said, holding his hands between hers. "Now it's my turn to be by your side as you find your way again." However, the loss of the gift brought consequences that Miguel had not foreseen. Without his special ability, he began to doubt every medical decision he made. The fear of making a mistake, of failing to save someone who could be saved, consumed him. The nights became restless, filled with nightmares where pale faces accused him of failing them. It was during this turbulent period that Dona Rosa, the old midwife who had taught him about medicinal herbs in his youth, fell seriously ill. Miguel was called to attend to her, but without her gift, he felt completely lost. The woman who had been like a second mother to him now depended on his purely human abilities. "My boy," whispered Dona Rosa, her voice weak but still full of wisdom. You always had the gift of healing, even before your godmother came along. What she gave you was just a tool, but your true talent comes from your heart." Those words touched Miguel deeply. He began to remember all the years of learning, all the lessons Dona Rosa had taught him about medicinal plants, about observing patients, about trusting his own instincts. He realized that he had become too dependent on his supernatural gift, forgetting the natural abilities he had developed. With renewed determination, Miguel immersed himself in his traditional medical studies. Anna helped him organize his notes, research new treatments, and, most importantly, reminded him to rest when he overdid it. Together, they transformed a room in the house into a small medical library, filled with books and journals that Miguel obtained through correspondence in larger cities. The couple married in a simple ceremony the following spring. The entire Valley of Shadows attended, and even those who had doubted Miguel after the loss of his gift began to recognize his renewed dedication to medicine. His reputation began to rebuild, no longer based on supernatural abilities, but on solid knowledge and genuine care for his patients. Anna returned to school, now stronger than ever, and her classes took on a new dimension when she began to include basic health and hygiene lessons for her students. Miguel occasionally visited the school to give short talks on disease prevention, turning medical knowledge into something accessible for the children. However, in his lonelier hours, Miguel still missed his connection with death, not because of the power it gave him, but because of the certainty that accompanied each diagnosis. There were nights when he would wake up startled, instinctively looking for the familiar presence of his godmother, only to be reminded of the sacrifice he had made. Anna noticed these moments of melancholy and found a unique way to help him. She began to keep a diary of the cases Miguel had successfully treated, documenting every recovery, every life saved through her conventional medical knowledge. "You see," she would say, showing him the filled pages, "you don't need supernatural gifts to make a difference." Life in the Valley of Shadows took its course, and gradually Miguel found a new rhythm in his medical practice. He learned to trust his natural instincts more, to observe each patient more closely, and to accept that uncertainty was part of medicine. The community, in turn, came to respect him not for his mysterious powers, but for his tireless dedication and genuine compassion. Meanwhile, in the shadows beyond human perception, a dark figure watched his godson with something that could be interpreted as pride. Michael's sacrifice had proved something that death already knew, that true healing power did not come from supernatural gifts, but from love and dedication to others. However, this would not be the last time their paths would cross, for some bonds, even when apparently broken, remain eternally interwoven in the fabric of fate. The years passed in the Valley of Shadows, and Miguel and Anna built the life together that exceeded their most optimistic expectations. Miguel's practice, now established in a larger house near the center of the village, has become a place of hope for the locals. Even without his supernatural gift, he had developed an extraordinary medical intuition based on years of careful observation and constant study. Anna had transformed the local school into a learning center that went beyond letters and numbers. Her lessons on basic health and hygiene began to show practical results. The village's children were getting sick less often, and their parents began to adopt healthier practices in their homes. One particularly cold fall morning, Miguel was awoken by urgent knocks on his door. It was a miner covered in dust and wide-eyed with panic. "Doctor, there's been a cave-in in the mine. There are several men trapped, some seriously injured." Miguel felt his heart racing. Ever since he lost his gift, accidents with multiple victims had been his biggest challenge. Not being able to see death meant having to make difficult decisions about who to prioritize for treatment. Even so, years of experience had taught him to remain calm in emergency situations. He quickly gathered his medical equipment and herbs, while Anna prepared bandages and clean water. The couple had developed an effective partnership in emergencies. She helped him with first aid, her calm presence helping both the patients and Miguel himself. When they arrived at the mine, the scene was chaotic. Men covered in dust and blood were being carried out of the partially collapsed tunnel. Desperate relatives crowded around, and the air was heavy with dust and fear. Miguel momentarily missed his gift. How much easier it would have been to know exactly who needed the most urgent attention. But there was no time for regrets. He began to examine the wounded methodically, prioritizing those with the most serious injuries. Anna organized a triage system, using her teaching skills to coordinate the volunteers who arrived to help. Among the injured was Joao, Dona Rosa's eldest son, who Miguel had helped bring into the world years ago. His body was crushed by a beam, and his breathing was shallow and irregular. Without his gift, Miguel couldn't tell if death was at his head or at his feet, but his years of experience told him that the situation was serious. While working tirelessly to save lives, Miguel began to notice something strange. A familiar, almost forgotten sensation began to manifest itself. It was like a tingling at the base of his neck, a peripheral awareness he hadn't felt for years. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a familiar shadow in the corner of his vision. He concentrated on his work, attributing the sensation to stress and exhaustion. The hours dragged by as he and Anna struggled to stabilize the most seriously injured. The sun was already setting when the last miner was rescued, and the final count was painful: 3 dead and 12 injured, some in critical condition. That night, while caring for the most serious patients in his makeshift clinic, Miguel finally understood what he was feeling. His connection with death, although much weaker than before, had not completely disappeared. It was like a distant echo, a muscle memory of his former gift. Perhaps, he thought, some bonds are too strong to be completely severed. The realization didn't bring back his former power, but it did offer a different kind of comfort. His sacrifice for Anna had not been in vain, but neither had it been a definitive sentence of separation from his godmother. Anna noticed the change in her husband in the days that followed. There was a new confidence in his medical decisions, a balance between natural intuition and acquired knowledge. "You look different," she commented one evening as they changed Joao's bandages. Miguel smiled softly. "I realized that I was never really alone on my journey," he replied. "The gift I received was only part of who I am as a doctor. The real gift was learning to trust in my own ability to help others." As the injured miners recovered, stories began to circulate around the Valley of Shadows. They spoke of how the doctor seemed to know exactly what each patient needed, how his presence brought peace even in the most difficult times. Some even whispered that his old gift had returned, but Miguel knew the truth. He had found a new kind of strength, born of the union between human knowledge and a more subtle connection with the mystery of life and death. John, against all expectations, began to show signs of recovery. His survival and rehabilitation became a symbol of hope for the village, proof that medicine, even without supernatural powers, could work miracles when practiced with dedication and love. Sometimes on the quietest nights, when Miguel made his rounds of the inpatients, he felt that familiar presence hovering in the shadows. It was no longer the clear and defined gift of before, but a deeper and more subtle understanding of the mysteries of life and death. It was as if his godmother, even after his sacrifice, had never really abandoned him, only changed the form of her guidance. With the recovery of the miners and the new understanding of his changed gift, Miguel found a balance he had never imagined possible. His clinic was thriving, and together with Anna, they had become fundamental pillars of the Valley of Shadows community. However, fate still had one last lesson in store for the doctor and his peculiar connection with death. One spring afternoon, while picking medicinal herbs in the fields surrounding the village, Miguel came across a young woman sitting under an ancient tree. Her black dress contrasted with the colorful landscape, and something about her presence seemed strangely familiar. "Hello, godson," said the young woman, her voice soft as the whisper of the wind among the leaves. She was his godmother, but in a form he had never seen before, more human, more approachable. Miguel sat down next to her, feeling that familiar tingle at the back of his neck intensify. "Why are you here?" he asked, noticing how the flowers around them seemed to be wilting slightly. "I've come to show you something," she replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "You've learned a lot since you renounced your original gift, but there's still one last lesson to be shared." She reached out and gently touched Miguel's forehead. Instantly, His vision expanded in an extraordinary way. He could see golden threads of light connecting all living things, plants, animals, people. It was a complex and delicate web of life, pulsating with energy. "What are you showing me?" he asked, amazed at the sight. "The true nature of life and death," explained his godmother. "They are not opposites as many people think, but part of the same cycle. Your original gift allowed you to see my presence, but this new understanding will show you something much deeper." Miguel watched as some of the golden threads gradually faded, while others shone more brightly. He understood that he was seeing the natural flow of life: birth, growth, decline, and death, all connected in an infinite pattern. "Your sacrifice for honor was not just an act of love," Death continued. "It was a catalyst for your evolution as a healer. You learned that true healing doesn't just come from knowing when someone is going to die, but from a deep understanding of the balance between life and death." In the days that followed, Miguel began to notice subtle changes in his way of practicing medicine. His intuition became even sharper, but in a different way. It was no longer a question of seeing death at the head or foot of the bed, but of understanding the vital flow of each patient. Anna noticed the transformation in her husband. "Your eyes look different," she commented one evening as they prepared medicinal herbs together, "as if you could see beyond what's on the surface." Miguel smiled, hugging her. "I've learned that true healing isn't just about fighting death, but understanding its role in the cycle of life. Each person we treat is part of something bigger, an interconnected web of existence." His new understanding led him to develop a more holistic approach to medicine. He began teaching his patients about balance between rest and activity, eating and fasting, work and leisure. The clinic became a healing center that treated not only physical ailments, but also offered comfort for the soul. The Valley of Shadows also began to change. Under the guidance of Miguel and Anna, the residents developed a new relationship with life and death. The funeral rituals, which had previously been filled only with sadness, began to include celebrations of the life lived. People learned to accept death as a natural part of existence, without losing hope or love for life. One starry night, while walking home after attending a difficult birth, Miguel felt his godmother's presence again. She was different now. Neither the shadowy figure of their first meetings, nor the young woman from the field of flowers, but something in between. "You finally understand," she said, her voice mingling with the night wind. "The real gift was never seeing my presence, but understanding the balance between the worlds." Miguel nodded, watching the stars above. "Every life I help bring into the world, every death I witness, every healing I perform, it's all part of a greater cycle. And that's why you were chosen as my godson," replied Death. "Not to have power over life and death, but to be a guardian of balance, a healer who understands both the preciousness of life and the naturalness of death." When he got home, he found Anna asleep in her favorite chair, a storybook on her lap. The moonlight bathed her serene face, and Miguel could see the golden threads of life shining around her, strong and vibrant. His sacrifice years ago had not been a loss, but a transformation, the beginning of a deeper understanding of his role as a doctor and as a human being. The Valley of Shadows remained his home, a place where life and death danced in delicate balance, and where a doctor, blessed with a unique gift, learned that the greatest power lies not in controlling fate, but in understanding and accepting its natural flow. And on the quietest nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, Miguel knew that his godmother was always close by, no longer as a presence to be feared, but as an old friend who had guided him on a journey of discovery and transformation. In a small hut on the edge of a dense forest lived John, a humble woodcutter, with his wife Maria. Life had never been easy for the couple, who faced days of hard work just to make ends meet. The hut, built by Joao himself years ago, was constantly in need of repair, with its wooden walls creaking in the wind and the roof threatening to cave in during the strongest storms. Joao woke up every day before sunrise, carrying his worn-out axe on his back and following the winding path that led into the heart of the forest. His steps were heavy, marked by years of walking the same route, while Maria stayed at home, tending the small vegetable garden they kept at the back of the hut and doing sewing work for the wealthier families in the nearby village. On that particular morning, the sky had a different hue, a deeper blue than usual, and the air carried a peculiar scent, a mixture of wild flowers and morning dew. John noticed that something was different as soon as he entered the forest. The birds were singing a more harmonious melody, and the leaves of the trees were dancing almost hypnotically in the gentle breeze. As he walked among the centuries-old trees, his thoughts wandered to the situation in which they lived. Winter was approaching and food reserves were scarcer than usual. Maria had commented the night before about how nice it would be to have a little more comfort, perhaps some chickens in the yard or an extra loaf of bread on the table. John felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders, wishing he could provide a better life for his beloved wife. Then something extraordinary happened. As he approached an ancient oak tree that he was planning to cut down, John heard a soft, melodious voice that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "John, the kind-hearted woodcutter," said the voice, causing him to stop immediately, his axe hanging in the air. From behind the tree emerged an ethereal figure, bright as moonlight and translucent as the morning mist. It was a forest fairy, with wings that looked like they were made of dewdrops and a dress woven from threads of sunlight. Her eyes shone with the wisdom of thousands of years, and her smile carried the kindness of the universe. "I've been watching you, John," continued the fairy, floating gracefully until she was face to face with the astonished woodcutter. "Day after day, you enter this forest, not out of greed or destruction, but out of necessity. You cut down only the oldest trees, those that have already lived their full lives, and always plant new saplings in their place. Your kindness and respect for nature have not gone unnoticed." John, still dumbfounded, could hardly find the words to reply. His calloused fingers gripped the axe handle tighter, not out of fear, but out of the emotion that was taking over his being. The fairy continued, her voice softer than the rustling of the leaves. "For your kindness and consideration, I would like to offer you a special gift. I grant you 3 wishes, 3 opportunities to change your destiny." The woodcutter finally found his voice, although it came out shaky and hesitant. 3 wishes? But how can I deserve such a gift? I'm just a simple woodcutter." The fairy smiled even more tenderly. "It's precisely your humility that makes you worthy. Remember, though, wishes are powerful, but they must be used wisely. Once uttered, they cannot be undone, except by another wish. Choose carefully, because sometimes what we think we want is not what we really need." With these words, the fairy handed John a small crystalline stone, which glowed with a light of its own. "When you're ready to make a wish, hold this stone close to your heart and speak your words clearly. But remember, 3 wishes, no more, no less." John tucked the stone into the pocket of his patched shirt, feeling its comforting warmth against his chest. His mind was already beginning to buzz with possibilities. Wealth, eternal health, a palace? The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. That evening, as John returned home earlier than usual, he could hardly contain his excitement to tell Mary about his extraordinary encounter. The sun was already setting over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as he hurried along the familiar path. His wife would certainly know how to help him choose the wisest desires. After all, she had always been the wiser of the two, with her prudent advice and thoughtful nature. However, as he approached their humble abode, John could not have imagined that this extraordinary gift was about to put his life and their relationship to the test in ways he had never imagined. The stone in his pocket pulsed gently, as if reminding him of the power and responsibility he now carried with him. Maria was at the door of the hut when she spotted John returning earlier than usual. Her brown eyes immediately detected something different about her husband. There was a liveliness in his step that she hadn't seen for years. As he approached, John gestured energetically, his face lit up with a smile that seemed not to fit. "Maria, my dear," he exclaimed, hurrying across the small yard. "You won't believe what happened today. Without waiting for an answer, John began to recount his encounter with the forest fairy, describing every detail with the enthusiasm of a child. Maria listened intently, her eyes growing wider as the story unfolded. 3 wishes? She finally asked when John had finished his account. Anything we want? Her hands, calloused from years of housework, trembled slightly as John showed her the crystalline stone that still pulsed gently in his pocket. The couple entered the small hut, where the aroma of a thin vegetable broth filled the room. They sat down at the simple wooden table, the magic stone placed carefully between them, its soft glow illuminating their faces in the twilight gloom. "We need to think very carefully," said Maria, always practical. "We could ask for a bigger house, or perhaps a flock of sheep." Her voice was interrupted by a loud growl from her stomach, reminding them that they hadn't eaten properly for days. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the small fire in the wood-burning stove. John watched his wife, noticing how she looked longingly at the almost empty pot on the fire. Winter was approaching, and their provisions were scarcer than ever. "Oh, how I wish I had a big, juicy sausage right now," sighed Maria, almost without realizing she had spoken aloud. At the same moment, the crystalline stone began to glow brightly, and before either of them could react, a huge sausage appeared on the table, its delicious aroma instantly filling the entire hut. John suddenly stood up, knocking over his chair. "Maria, how could you be so impulsive? It was one of our 3 precious wishes." His voice shook with frustration and disappointment. All the careful planning she had imagined during her walk home seemed to have been wasted in a moment of weakness. Maria, realizing the extent of her mistake, began to weep silently. "I am sorry, Zon. I was so hungry. I didn't think." Her tears fell onto the worn wooden table, while the sausage, the object of all the confusion, remained there, provocatively perfuming the room. John's anger grew as he saw the situation. Years of deprivation and hard work, and now one of his precious desires had been wasted on a simple sausage. Without thinking about the consequences, overwhelmed by the frustration of the moment, he grabbed the crystalline stone and exclaimed, "I wish this sausage would stick to your nose." The horror of the situation only became apparent when the stone glowed again, and in the blink of an eye, the sausage flew off the table and stuck firmly to Maria's nose. She let out a scream of surprise and despair, her hands trying futilely to tear away the food now firmly stuck to her face. "John, what have you done?" Maria screamed in panic, running around the small hut. "Get away from me. Get off me now." Her attempts to remove the sausage were futile. It was magically stuck, as if it had become part of her face. Regret overtook John instantly. All his anger dissipated at seeing his beloved wife in such a state of distress. "Maria, forgive me. I didn't mean to. I was angry. I didn't think straight." He tried to approach her, but Maria pulled away, still crying and desperately trying to get rid of the sausage. Night fell completely over the small hut, finding the couple in an absurd and desperate situation. 2 of the 3 wishes had already been used, and all they had to show for it was a sausage stuck to Maria's nose. The heavy silence was broken only by Maria's occasional sobs and the crackling of the wood in the stove. John sat heavily in his chair, the crystalline stone still in his hands, now with only a faint glow, as if he were mocking his foolishness. There was only one wish left, and the situation had become infinitely worse than it had been before his encounter with the fairy. Her words echoed in his mind. Wishes must be used wisely. Maria slowly approached the table, her eyes red from crying, the sausage still firmly stuck in her nose as a constant reminder of her impulsiveness and John's thoughtless anger. The couple looked at each other, the realization of their folly weighing on them like a heavy blanket of regret. The silence in the hut was almost palpable, broken only by Maria's occasional sobs and the crackling of the wood in the stove. John stared at the crystalline stone in his hands, its faint glow reminding him that only one wish remained. The situation had turned into a nightmare, and the simplicity of their previous lives now seemed like a distant dream. "We need to think calmly," John finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. We can't waste the last wish like we did with the other two. Maria nodded silently, her hands unconsciously touching the sausage that still remained firmly stuck to her nose. The couple spent the next few hours discussing their options. They could use the last wish to ask for immense riches, John argued, and then they would have enough money to consult the best doctors and wizards in the kingdom to solve Maria's nose problem. Or they could ask for infinite wisdom, Mary suggested, and then they would find a solution on their own. But as the night wore on, it became increasingly clear that none of these options were really viable. Maria could barely eat or drink with the sausage on the way, and the discomfort was becoming unbearable. Besides, the people in the village would surely notice her peculiar condition, and the shame would be unbearable. "John," Maria said softly, after yet another failed attempt to take a sip of water, "you know what we need to do." Her words carried a weight of resignation that made John's heart squeeze. He knew she was right. There was no real choice to be made. With a deep sigh, John held the crystalline stone close to his chest, as the fairy had instructed. "I wish for the sausage to disappear from Mary's nose," he pronounced clearly, his voice trembling slightly. The stone glowed one last time with an intensity that lit up the whole hut, and in the blink of an eye, the sausage was gone. Maria touched her nose, now free, with a mixture of relief and sadness. They were back where they started, as poor as before, but with a valuable lesson learned the hard way. The couple embraced in silence, their tears mingling as they reflected on the extraordinary events of that day. The next morning, as the rising sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, John and Mary sat at their simple table, sharing the same thin vegetable broth they had eaten the night before. The crystalline stone, now dull, rested on the table as a silent reminder of their adventure. "You know, John," said Maria, breaking the thoughtful silence, "maybe we've received something more valuable than 3 wishes." John looked at her, curious. "We've learned that we already have what really matters. We have each other, our home, and although it's simple, it's more than enough." John reached across the table and took his wife's hand. "You're right, my love. The fairy said that wishes should be used wisely, but the real wisdom was in realizing that we didn't need them in the first place." As they talked, they began to notice small changes around them. The sun seemed to shine more brightly through the gaps in the walls, illuminating their humble abode in a way they had never noticed before. The scent of the wild flowers that Maria used to pick to decorate the table seemed sweeter, and the birdsong outside sounded more melodious. "Perhaps," said John, getting up to start his day's work, "the real magic lies not in wishes granted by fairies, but in learning to value what we already have." Maria smiled, silently agreeing as she began to tidy up the kitchen. The following weeks brought subtle but significant changes for the couple. Joao began to notice more the small joys in his daily work. The way the sunlight filtered through the treetops, the satisfaction of planting a new sapling after felling an old tree, the comforting sound of his axe rhythmically tapping against the wood. Maria, for her part, found new joy in her domestic chores. Her sewing for the families in the village became even more exquisite as she came to see each stitch as a little work of art. The vegetable garden at the back of the house seemed to thrive under her renewed care, as if responding to her newfound contentment. The townspeople began to notice the change in the couple. There was a serenity in their faces that hadn't been there before, a quiet joy that seemed to emanate from within them. Some said it was as if they had been touched by some kind of magic, although no one could explain exactly what had changed. And so, life continued its course in the small hut at the edge of the forest. The crystalline stone found its place on a shelf above the fireplace, serving as a constant reminder not of the wishes they had lost, but of the valuable lesson they had gained. John and Mary discovered that the real magic was not in transforming their lives through magical wishes, but in learning to see the magic that already existed in their simple, love-filled lives. As the seasons passed, the story of the 3 wishes of the woodcutter and his wife began to spread through the village. First as whispers between neighbors, then as a local legend that the elders told the youngsters on winter evenings around the fireplace. Some doubted, Others fervently believed, but all agreed that there had been something different about John and Mary since that memorable day. The most notable change was not in their material possessions, which remained as modest as before, but in the way they faced life's adversities. One particularly difficult afternoon, when a storm damaged part of the hut's roof, the couple faced the setback with a serenity that surprised their neighbors. "Remember, John," said Maria as she helped her husband pick up the pieces of wood scattered around the yard, "how we would have reacted to this before the 3 wishes?" John smiled, remembering how they used to despair at every little misfortune life presented them with. The news of the couple who had wasted 3 magical wishes eventually reached the ears of a wealthy merchant passing through the village. Intrigued by the story, he decided to pay a visit to the woodcutter's humble hut. He arrived on an autumn morning, his well-fed horse contrasting with the simplicity of the place. "I heard that you had the chance to have everything you wanted," commented the merchant, sitting down at the simple table where Maria had served herbal tea. "How can you seem so happy after missing out on such an opportunity?" John and Mary exchanged a complicit glance before answering. "Sir," John began, "we've learned that sometimes what we think we want isn't what we really need. The fairy gave us 3 wishes, but she gave us something much more valuable, the ability to see the wealth we already possess." The merchant watched the couple curiously. Despite their worn clothes and the simplicity of their home, there was a dignity in their posture and a light in their eyes that he rarely saw even among the wealthiest people he knew. Before leaving, he offered Joao a job on his property, with a generous salary and a bigger house to live in. To his surprise, the couple politely declined the offer. "Our lives may seem poor in the eyes of others," Maria explained, "but we have discovered that true wealth lies not in what we possess, but in what we are able to appreciate." The news of the couple's refusal only increased their reputation in the village. People began to seek them out not only to buy firewood or order sewing, but also in search of advice and wisdom. Maria, with her natural kindness, began to teach other women in the village how to find beauty in the simplest of everyday tasks. John, for his part, began to take young apprentices with him into the forest, teaching them not only the art of cutting down trees, but also the importance of respecting and preserving nature. He shared with them the knowledge he had accumulated over the years about which trees to choose, how to plant new saplings, and how to maintain the forest balance. On one such occasion, while they were walking along the familiar trail, one of his apprentices asked him if he had ever seen the forest fairy again. John stopped for a moment, looking thoughtfully at the surrounding trees. "Not with my eyes," he replied, "but I feel her presence in every breeze that moves the leaves, in every ray of sunlight that passes through the branches, in every new seedling we plant." The crystalline stone, now dull, remained in its place of honor on the mantelpiece, but it had become more than just a reminder of their adventure. It was a symbol of transformation, not because of the magic it had once contained, but because of the change it had brought about in their lives. One night, as the couple were getting ready for bed, Maria noticed something different about the stone. "John, come and see this," she called, pointing to a soft glow that seemed to emanate from the crystal. It was a different light from before, softer and more constant, like the glow of moonlight on a clear night. "Perhaps," suggested Joao, hugging his wife as they watched the phenomenon, "it's a reminder that true magic has never left us. It just changed into something deeper and more lasting." The small hut, which had once seemed so inadequate and precarious, had become a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand the secret of true happiness. The wooden walls, although they still creaked in the wind, now seemed to contain an ancient wisdom, as if they had absorbed the lessons learned by their inhabitants. Maria's garden flourished in an extraordinary way, its flowers and herbs growing with a vigor that seemed almost supernatural. People said that her medicinal plants had special properties, capable not only of curing physical ailments, but also of bringing peace to the spirit. And so, without realizing it, John and Mary had become guardians of a different kind of magic than the one they had initially been offered, a magic that didn't depend on wishes or enchantments, but sprang naturally from the hearts of those who had learned to see beauty in simplicity and richness in what they already possessed. The years passed gently over the little hut at the edge of the forest, and with them, John and Mary's story continued to evolve in unexpected ways. The wisdom they had acquired through their experience with the three wishes became something greater than themselves, touching the lives of everyone around them in subtle but profound ways. One particularly special morning, while the dew was still covering the grass in the yard, a young mother from the village arrived at their door, carrying her sick son. The boy was pale and feverish, and the local doctors had already given up on finding a cure. Maria, who over the years had perfected her knowledge of medicinal herbs, welcomed them with the same kindness that had become her trademark. While preparing tea with herbs from her enchanted garden, Maria shared the story of the three wishes with the young mother. "See that stone over the fireplace?" she asked, pointing to the crystal that still occasionally emitted its soft glow. It taught us that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disappointments. The little patient, who could barely keep his eyes open, seemed to wake up a little when he heard the story. Maria continued her narrative while administering the tea, and little by little, a healthy color began to return to the child's cheeks. The mother, amazed, swore she had seen a special glow emanating from the herbs when Mary picked them from the garden. John, who watched the scene from the door of the hut, smiled as he realized how his wife had changed over the years. She wasn't just a healer with her medicinal herbs. She had become a keeper of stories and wisdom, using her experiences to help others find their own way. News of the boy's miraculous recovery spread quickly, attracting even more people to the small hut. But what really impressed visitors was not the supposed healing powers of Mary's herbs, but the atmosphere of peace and contentment that permeated the place. One day, while John was working in the forest with his apprentices, he felt a familiar presence. The air became lighter, and the leaves on the trees danced in a way he hadn't seen since that fateful day years ago. For a moment, he thought he caught a glimpse of the fairy's ethereal silhouette among the trees, her smile as gentle as he remembered. "Master John," called one of his young apprentices, interrupting his thoughts, "why didn't you ever want to build a bigger house, even after your medicinal herbs started bringing in some money?" John leaned his axe against a tree and sat down on a fallen log, inviting the young men to join him. "Let me tell you a story about desires, satisfaction, and the true nature of wealth," he began, his eyes shining with the wisdom of years. Meanwhile, in the hut, Maria was visited by a young bride from the village who had come to ask for advice on how to build a happy marriage. The crystalline stone over the fireplace glowed softly as Maria began to share her story, as if she approved of passing on that hard-won wisdom. "The secret," Maria explained, "is not in having everything you want, but in learning to want what you already have." His words carried the weight of lived experience, and the young bride felt she was receiving something much more valuable than simple marriage advice. As the sun began to set, John returned home to find his wife preparing dinner. The scent of fresh herbs mingled with the soup on the stove, creating a welcoming atmosphere that seemed to embrace everyone who entered the small hut. "You know, Maria," said John as he sat down at the family table, "today in the forest, I had the impression that our magical friend was watching us again." Maria smiled, understanding perfectly what he meant. The magic they had experienced on that distant day had never really left them. It had just transformed into something more subtle and permanent. That night, as the couple prepared for bed, the crystalline stone began to glow with an intensity it hadn't shown for years. A gentle breeze blew in through the window, bringing with it the scent of wild flowers and a whisper that seemed to say, "You've learned your lesson well." John and Mary fell asleep holding hands, their hearts filled with gratitude, not for the desires they had lost, but for the wisdom they had gained. The little hut, which might have seemed inadequate to some, was for them a palace of contentment and peace. The story of the three wishes continued to be told in the village for generations, becoming a legend that carried a universal truth. The real magic is not in getting everything we want, but in learning to find joy and contentment in what we already have. And so the little hut at the edge of the forest remained a beacon of hope and wisdom, reminding all who visited that sometimes the greatest treasures in life are not those we can wish for, but those we discover along the way, in the lessons learned and the love shared. The crystalline stone, a silent witness to her journey, continued to glow softly over the fireplace, no longer as a symbol of unfulfilled desires, but as a constant reminder that true magic resides in the hearts of those who have learned to see beauty in simplicity and richness in contentment. At the top of Mount Olympus, where the clouds eternally danced around the golden palaces of the gods, Zeus watched the earth with a mixture of fury and determination. Prometheus' theft of the sacred fire had shaken the divine order, and the king of the gods could not allow such an affront to go unanswered. His stormy eyes scanned the horizon as his mind devised the perfect plan for revenge. In his celestial forge, Hephaestus worked tirelessly, molding gold and clay with his deft hands. Golden sparks danced in the air as he shaped the most beautiful creature ever conceived, Pandora, the first mortal woman. Her face was as delicate as the finest porcelain, her hair as black as the deepest night. In her eyes bore the sparkle of curiosity that would be both her blessing and her curse. Aphrodite surrounded creation, giving her the gift of beauty and seduction, while Athena gifted her with intelligence and manual skills. Hermes, the messenger of the gods, whispered in her ears the gift of speech and the ability to weave words like silk. Each deity contributed a gift, making Pandora irresistible to mortal eyes. Meanwhile, on Earth, Epimetheus lived in peace with his brother Prometheus. Both were titans who had chosen to live among humans, helping them to prosper. Prometheus, after stealing the sacred fire, had become a hero among mortals, teaching them how to master flames, forge metals, and cook food. His act of rebellion against Zeus had changed life on Earth forever. Zeus, watching the humans' progress with disdain, was finalizing the preparations for his plan. An ebony box, adorned with intricate golden carvings, rested on his throne. Inside it, invisible to mortal eyes, stirred the most terrible afflictions ever known to mankind. The king of the gods smiled, knowing that his revenge would be much sweeter than any direct punishment. Pandora, newly created and curious about everything around her, was sent to Earth with specific instructions. She was to marry Epimetheus and never open the mysterious box she carried with her. Zeus knew that this prohibition would only increase her desire to discover what was inside. Curiosity was her deepest nature, woven into her very essence by the gods. On arriving on Earth, Pandora was greeted by Epimetheus with instant fascination. His brother Prometheus, more cautious, warned him about accepting gifts from the gods, especially Zeus. But Epimetheus, whose name means the one who thinks afterwards, didn't heed his brother's warnings. He was completely bewitched by Pandora's beauty and grace. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Pandora and Epimetheus lived in harmony, building a life together in their modest stone house. The mysterious box rested in a corner of the room, seemingly forgotten, but always present in Pandora's thoughts. At night, she could swear she heard whispers coming from it, tantalizing calls that penetrated her dreams. Life on Earth was simple but rewarding. Humans, thanks to the fire stolen by Prometheus, developed rapidly. They learned how to work metal, build sturdier shelters, and defend themselves against wild beasts. They didn't know disease, they didn't age with suffering, and wars were foreign concepts to their pure hearts. Pandora watched everything with fascination, taking an active part in the life of the community. She taught the women to weave, talked to the men about philosophy, and played with the children. Her presence brought a new dimension of beauty and grace to the world of mortals. However, with each passing day, curiosity about the contents of the box grew in his heart like a persistent seed. One particularly silent night, while Epimetheus slept soundly, Pandora once again found herself in front of the mysterious box. The full moon cast its silvery glow through the window, making the golden carvings sparkle hypnotically. The whispers seemed stronger than ever, promising to reveal secrets beyond his imagination. His hands trembled as he touched the smooth surface of the box. What harm could there be in just a little peek, she thought to herself. Surely the gods wouldn't have entrusted me with something truly dangerous. Her fingers slid into the lock, hesitant but determined. The air around her seemed charged with electricity, as if the cosmos itself were holding its breath. On Olympus, Zeus watched with a satisfied smile, knowing that his plan was about to come to fruition. Revenge against Prometheus would be carried out through Pandora's delicate hands, and humanity would pay the price for its arrogance in defying the gods. The lock gave way with a soft click, and for a moment, everything remained absolutely silent. Pandora opened the lid just a crack, enough for a single gust of wind to escape, carrying with it the first of the evils that would forever change the fate of mankind. Without realizing it, she had started a chain of events that would irreversibly transform the world of mortals. Pandora watched in horror as dark and sinister shapes escaped from the box in an endless torrent. The first breath of wind turned into a deafening howl, and dark creatures representing every imaginable affliction spread across the world like an uncontrollable storm. Their eyes, wide with dread, witnessed the birth of every evil that now infected the earth. Diseases, represented by greenish, slimy shadows, snaked through the air, looking for hosts to infect. Old age manifested itself as a grayish mist that began to touch mortals, robbing them of their eternal youth. War emerged as bloodthirsty red specters, planting the first seeds of conflict in human hearts. Famine rose like a yellowish wind that withered crops and poisoned herds. Epimetheus woke up startled by the turmoil. When he saw his beloved Pandora standing by the open box, he instantly understood the magnitude of the catastrophe. "What have you done?" he whispered, his voice laced not with anger, but with deep sadness. Pandora, overcome with despair, struggled to close the lid of the box, while more and more evil escaped into the world. Outside the house, the first screams began to echo. The inhabitants of the village, once so peaceful and happy, felt the changes in their bodies and minds. Pains they had never experienced before struck them, while dark thoughts began to eat away at their souls. Humanity's innocence was being brutally ripped away, replaced by a new and terrible reality. On Olympus, Zeus watched his revenge unfold with cruel satisfaction. His eyes sparkled with each new suffering that spread across the earth. Knowing that Prometheus would be forced to witness the price of his rebellion through the suffering of those he had tried so hard to protect, Prometheus, still free at that moment, sensed the change in the air. The Titan who had stolen the god's fire to benefit humanity immediately realized that something terrible had happened. He ran towards his brother's house, his heart heavy with the foreboding of the disaster he would encounter. Pandora, in the midst of the chaos she had unleashed, struggled desperately with the box. Her tears fell onto the dark wood as she tried to contain what was left inside the cursed container. It was then that she noticed something different, a soft, golden light, unlike the dark shadows that had escaped, was still pulsating at the bottom of the box. Hope, the last entity trapped in the box, glowed serenely, waiting for her moment. Pandora, on an impulse, quickly closed the lid, keeping this last gift safe inside the box. Perhaps, she thought, in the midst of her despair, this last divine gift could somehow make up for the harm she had caused. The changes in the outside world were devastating. The sky, once always clear, began to be covered with dark clouds. The first signs of aging appeared on people's faces. Children began to fall ill, and disputes over previously abundant resources began to arise between neighbors who until then had lived in harmony. Prometheus arrived at his brother's house to find Pandora hugging the box, sobbing uncontrollably, while Epimetheus tried to console her. The Titan, with his ancient wisdom, immediately understood that this was Zeus' revenge, plotted not only against him, but against all of humanity. "My dear Pandora," said Prometheus softly, approaching the weeping woman, "don't blame yourself entirely. Zeus planned this from the start. Your curiosity was not just a personality trait, but a divine weapon, forged specifically for this moment." As they talked, the first rays of the rising sun seeped through the cracks in the house, illuminating the box that Pandora still held. The golden glow of hope, still imprisoned, seems stronger in the daylight, as if to remind everyone of its presence. "Hope remains with us," remarked Epimetheus, noticing the glow. "Perhaps this is the true gift of the gods, not to torture us, but to give us the strength to face all the other evils that now afflict us." Pandora raised her eyes, still watery with tears, but with a new understanding dawning in her heart. Hope, kept safe inside the box, would be humanity's last resort, a comfort in the darkest moments to come. Outside, the world was continuing its transformation. The first conflicts were breaking out between communities. Disease was spreading rapidly, and famine was beginning to show its cruel face. However, in the midst of all this chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Humans, facing adversity for the first time, began to demonstrate surprising strength and resilience. Prometheus watched with a mixture of sadness and admiration as the mortals adapted to their new circumstances. The fire he had stolen for them became even more precious now, not just as a tool, but as a symbol of hope and progress. People gathered around the fires at night, sharing stories and mutual comfort, finding ways to survive and even thrive in the midst of adversity. News of the box's opening spread quickly among mortals, but instead of condemning Pandora, many began to see in her a reflection of their own nature, imperfect, curious, and capable of both mistakes and redemption. The story of the preserved hope became a symbol that, even in the darkest times, there was still light to be found. As the days turned into weeks, humanity began to adapt to its new reality. Pandora, still carrying the weight of her action, dedicated herself to helping those who suffered from the afflictions she had freed. Her house became a refuge for the sick and afflicted, where she shared words of comfort and stories about the hope she still held. Epimetheus, for his part, worked tirelessly to strengthen the community's defenses. With the emergence of the first territorial disputes, he had to teach the men the art of defensive warfare, a skill he had never imagined would be necessary in previous times. His heart was heavy when he saw how the people, once so united, now looked at each other with suspicion. Prometheus, foreseeing that Zeus' revenge was not complete, was preparing for his own fate. He knew that the king of the gods would not be satisfied with the suffering of mortals alone. During his waking nights, he shared his knowledge with the humans closest to him, teaching them not only about fire, but about medicine, agriculture, and the arts needed to survive the new times. The box, now kept on a specially built altar, emitted a soft, steady glow, hope pulsing inside. People came from far and wide to gaze at it, finding comfort in the golden light that escaped through its cracks. Pandora noticed that those who approached the box seemed to leave with a new vigor, as if the mere proximity to hope renewed their strength. In the land of mortals, the seasons began to change for the first time. Autumn arrived, bringing with it the first experience of scarcity that humanity would ever know. The trees, once evergreen and fruitful, lost their leaves. The fields, which had previously produced abundantly, began to show signs of exhaustion. Famine, one of the afflictions unleashed, began to show its cruelest face. In the midst of these changes, something unexpected began to happen. Humans, forced by necessity, began to develop new skills and technologies. The knowledge of fire, given to them by Prometheus, was expanded and improved. They learned how to store food, create more efficient tools, and build sturdier shelters. Adversity, although painful, was proving to be a driving force for progress. Pandora watched these transformations with a mixture of guilt and admiration. Each new achievement of humanity seemed like a small triumph over the evils it had unleashed. In her conversations with visitors, she began to realize that perhaps her action, although terrible, had forced humanity to evolve in ways that would not have been possible in its previous existence of pure simplicity. Zeus, from the heights of Olympus, watched the developments with growing irritation. The resilience of mortals surprised and annoyed him. He was even more disturbed by the fact that hope, which he had planned as the final blow, its absence should have been the real torment, remained with them, kept in the box by Pandora. It was then that the king of the gods decided to carry out the second part of his plan. On a particularly violent, stormy night, he sent his servants to capture Prometheus. The Titan, who had been waiting for this moment, did not resist. He was taken to Mount Caucasus, where he would be chained and condemned to eternal torment. An eagle would devour his liver every day, and because it was immortal, the organ would regenerate itself every night so that the ordeal could begin again. The news of Prometheus' punishment spread quickly among mortals, causing great consternation. Pandora felt the weight of her guilt increase, knowing that the Titan's suffering was directly linked to his weakness in the face of curiosity. Epimetheus, devastated by his brother's fate, spent days in silence, contemplating the flames that now seemed more like a painful reminder than a gift. However, even in this dark moment, something extraordinary happened. Instead of giving in to despair, humanity united in its shared pain. Stories about Prometheus' sacrifice began to be told around the campfires. His act of stealing fire and his punishment became symbols of resistance and hope. Pandora's box, containing the last and most precious of gifts, began to glow more brightly during these nocturnal gatherings. It was as if hope responded to the collective strength of mortals, feeding off their determination and giving them redoubled courage. Observing this phenomenon, Pandora began to understand something profound about the nature of hope. It wasn't just a passive force, waiting to comfort the afflicted, but an active energy that grew and strengthened with every act of resistance, every small victory over adversity that she herself had unleashed on the world. Communities began to organize themselves in new ways. Where once there had only been families living in natural harmony, more complex social structures now emerged. Leaders emerged, not through strength or fear, but through their ability to inspire and guide others through difficult times. Knowledge became a valuable currency, passed down from generation to generation with a new sense of urgency and purpose. Epimetheus, emerging from his mourning, took on an important role in this new order. His experiences, both the joy of his marriage to Pandora and the pain of losing his brother, had made him wise in a way that only suffering could teach. He began to advise the younger ones, teaching them to find a balance between caution and courage, between tradition and innovation. Pandora spent more and more time by the box, studying the glow of hope that pulsed inside. She noticed that the golden light seemed to respond to the emotions of the people around her, intensifying at times of greatest need. During the darkest nights, when illnesses seemed more severe or when hunger struck harder, the glow became more intense, as if it wanted to reach those who needed comfort the most. On one of these nights of contemplation, Pandora made a surprising discovery. While carefully observing the pattern of light, she noticed that tiny sparks occasionally escaped through the gaps in the box, floating like golden fireflies before dissolving into thin air. Each person touched by these sparks seemed renewed, as if a tiny seed of hope had been planted in their heart. This discovery led Pandora to a new understanding. Hope didn't have to be completely contained. It could be shared in small doses, nourishing the human spirit without running out. It was like the fire that Prometheus had stolen. A single flame could light thousands of torches without losing its own light. Meanwhile, humanity continued to adapt to adversity. The first cities began to emerge, with walls to protect against wars and warehouses to store food during periods of scarcity. Medical knowledge, initiated by Prometheus, expanded as people learned to fight the diseases that now afflicted them. Epimetheus, observing these changes, began to organize regular meetings where people could share their knowledge and experiences. These gatherings, always held around a central bonfire, became sacred moments of union and learning. Pandora's box was always brought to these gatherings, its soft glow illuminating the faces of the participants. At one of these gatherings, a young fisherman shared a story that captured everyone's attention. He spoke of seeing Prometheus in his dreams, still chained to Mount Caucasus, but smiling despite his torment. In the dream, the Titan had said that his true gift to humanity was not just fire, but the ability to turn adversity into progress. This story caused Pandora to reflect deeply. she began to realize that perhaps the evils she had unleashed were not just curses, but also catalysts for change. Disease had led to the development of medicine, famine to the evolution of agriculture, and even war had taught valuable lessons about unity and diplomacy. The seasons continued their cycle, bringing new challenges with each change. Winter, especially severe that year, forced communities to develop more efficient techniques for preserving food and building shelters. People learned to weave warmer clothes and conserve the heat of the fire in more efficient ways. In the midst of these adaptations, Pandora noticed something extraordinary. Some of the evils she had released seemed to be transforming. Not that they had disappeared, but humans were learning to find benefits even in adversity. Old age, for example, came to be seen not just as a burden, but as a source of wisdom and experience. One afternoon, while assisting a group of healers treating the sick, Pandora had an epiphany. She realized that her true redemption would not come from keeping hope in the box forever, but from learning to distribute it wisely. Just as Prometheus' fire had spread from torch to torch, perhaps hope could be shared from heart to heart. With this new understanding, Pandora began to develop a ritual. During evening gatherings, she would open the box just enough for a few sparks of hope to escape, dancing among those present like shooting stars. Each person touched by these sparks became a bearer of hope, capable of transmitting it to others through words and actions. Zeus, watching from Olympus, was intrigued by this unexpected development. His revenge had transformed the world in ways he had not foreseen. Humans, instead of succumbing to despair, were becoming stronger, more resilient, and in a way, closer to the gods themselves in their ability to face challenges and create solutions. Epimetheus, seeing his wife's work, felt his love for her grow even more. The woman who had been sent as an instrument of divine vengeance had become a source of healing and hope for humanity. Her act of keeping hope in the box, which had initially seemed a small consolation, was proving to be as significant as her brother's theft of the fire. Communities began to send messengers to each other, sharing not only resources and knowledge, but also stories of hope and overcoming. A network of solidarity began to form, connecting people who, despite distances and differences, faced the same challenges and dreamed the same dreams. Pandora's name, which had initially been associated with calamity, began to take on new meanings. People spoke of her not only as the one who had unleashed the evils of the world, but as the guardian of hope, the one who had learned to turn her mistake into a source of strength for all humanity. One particularly significant morning, Pandora woke up with a different feeling. The light of dawn came through the window of her house, illuminating the box that held hope. And for the first time since she had opened it, she didn't feel the crushing weight of guilt. Years had passed since that fateful night, and the world, although changed, was not as lost as she had first feared. Around her community, now a thriving city, evidence of adaptation and progress was visible everywhere. Hospitals had been built to treat the sick, complex irrigation systems guaranteed harvests even in difficult times, and schools passed on knowledge to new generations. Humanity had learned not only to survive, but to thrive in the face of adversity. Epimetheus, who was watching his wife contemplate the sunrise, noticed a change in her countenance. The years had left their mark on her face. Old age, one of the afflictions released, had not spared her, but her eyes retained a special sparkle, now mixed with the wisdom that only time could bring. During one of the evening meetings, an elder shared an observation that captured the essence of what they had experienced. The evils that escaped from the box were not only our curse, but our harshest teachers. Each challenge forced us to grow. Each pain taught us compassion. Each loss showed us the value of what we have. The elder's words resonated deeply with Pandora. She began to understand that perhaps this was the gods' real plan, not just to punish humanity, but to force it to evolve. The presence of evil in the world had created the necessary context for hope to become truly meaningful. Occasional news arrived about Prometheus, still chained to his rock. Travelers reported that despite his eternal torment, the Titan smiled when he saw the cities humans had built, the progress they had made. His sacrifice had not been in vain. The fire he had stolen had become much more than just a flame. On one special night, when the full moon bathed the earth in its silvery light, Pandora made a transformative decision. Gathering the whole community together, she explained that it was time for a change in the way they kept hope. The box, which for so long had been kept closed with only tiny sparks escaping, needed to be rethought in its purpose. Hope, she explained, is not like the other evils that have escaped. It doesn't run out when it's shared. On the contrary, it multiplies. Each person who carries hope in their heart becomes a source of it for others. Maybe it's time we trusted this truth more. With careful and deliberate gestures, Pandora began a new ritual. Instead of allowing only small sparks to escape, she opened the box completely. The golden glow of hope flooded the night, stronger than any fire, brighter than any star. But contrary to what many had feared, hope did not disperse as the other evils had done. Instead, the golden light danced among the people present, touching each of them before returning to the box, as if establishing a permanent connection. It was as if hope had created an invisible network, connecting all human hearts to their original source. This moment marked the beginning of a new era. The box would remain open, no longer as a sealed receptacle, but as a constant beacon. People learned that they could approach it freely, renew their strength, and set off again, taking with them not just the memory of the light, but its living essence. Zeus, watching from Olympus, finally understood something he hadn't anticipated. His revenge, designed to punish Prometheus and humanity, had inadvertently created something stronger than any divine power. A humanity that not only hoped for better days, but actively worked to create them. Epimetheus, who had always carried the weight of not having been cautious enough in accepting Pandora as his wife, now saw his decision in a new light. What had seemed like a weakness had turned out to be a strength. His ability to love and trust, even in the face of the unknown, had allowed hope to find her true purpose among mortals. The following generations would grow up hearing the story not only of the evils Pandora unleashed, but of the wisdom with which she guarded and then shared hope. Her story would become a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always the possibility of transformation and renewal. And so, what began as divine vengeance turned into an unexpected gift. The evils that escaped from the bots would continue to challenge humanity, but now there was a balance. Hope, no longer a prisoner but a partner, shone as a constant reminder that true power lies not in avoiding difficulties, but in finding the strength to overcome them. Pandora, observing the legacy she had inadvertently created, finally found peace. Her curiosity, which Zeus had planned as a weapon, had become a catalyst for the growth and evolution of humanity. In her mistake, she had discovered a profound truth, that sometimes it is precisely through our failures that we find our greatest gifts. The rising sun tinted the hills of Rome golden as Tarquin the sovereign gazed down on the city from the top of his palace. The seventh and last king of Rome had just completed his first year in power, following the controversial death of his predecessor Servius Tullius. The streets were already buzzing with the morning routine, but something in the air suggested that this would be no ordinary day. Lucius, his closest advisor and confidant, approached with hurried steps, his sandals echoing across the marble floor. "My king," he said, breathing heavily, "there is a woman at the gates. She's unlike anyone I've ever seen." Tarquin raised an eyebrow, more irritated than curious at the interruption. "How different, Lucius? Speak clearly." "Her eyes, my lord, seem to contain the age of the world. She carries 9 volumes in her arms and insists on speaking only to you." The guards tried to stop her, but Lucius hesitated. Their weapons simply crumbled to dust when they touched her. The king adjusted his purple robe, a symbol of his power, and made a dismissive gesture. "Very well, bring her to me. Let's see what kind of tricks this woman has to show us." When the visitor entered the royal hall, the air seemed to thicken. She was neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor ugly. Her appearance changed subtly with every glance, like flowing water that never keeps the same shape. In her arms were 9 books bound in ancient leather, each emanating an aura of its own. I am the Sibyl of Cougars. Her voice resounded through the hall as if coming from multiple directions, and I carry with me the fate of Rome. Tarquin, used to intimidating his subjects with his imposing presence, felt strangely diminished. Even so, he maintained the authoritarian pose that characterized him. And why would a prophetess leave her cave to visit Rome? Because Rome will be eternal, replied the Sibyl, and its destiny is intertwined with the destiny of the world. In these 9 books are written all the prophecies that will guide your city through the centuries. The king laughed, more out of nervousness than amusement. And I suppose you want to sell them to me? Yes, she replied simply, stating a price that made the king's eyes widen. That's more gold than we spent building the Temple of Jupiter, protested Tarquin. You must be mad. The Sibyl didn't reply. Instead, she walked over to the brazier heating the hall and, without hesitation, threw 3 of the books into the flames. The fire took on impossible colors, and a scent of ancient wisdom filled the room. The price remains the same, she declared. Now for 6 books? Tarquin felt his throat go dry. Lucius next to him visibly paled. The king, however, stood firm in his refusal. It's still an absurd price. Again, without showing any emotion, the Sibyl threw 3 more volumes into the fire. The flames danced in hypnotic patterns, and whispers in forgotten languages echoed through the hall. Same price, she said, for the last 3 books. The hall plunged into a sepulchral silence. Tarquin looked at Lucius, who nodded discreetly. The advisor, known for his wisdom, seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. My king, whispered Lucius, think carefully. 6 volumes of prophecies have already been lost. If these last ones are also lost, Tarquin felt the weight of the decision on his shoulders. His ambition had led him to the throne of Rome, but now something greater was at stake. It wasn't just about power or wealth. It was about the fate of a city which, according to the mysterious woman in front of him, was destined for eternity. The books contain more than just predictions, the Sibyl continued, as if reading her thoughts. They are a guide to navigating the storms to come. Rome will face trials that will test its very existence. Without this wisdom, how will they know which way to go? The king realized that he was facing a historic crossroads. His actions at that moment would echo down the centuries, affecting not only his reign, but the fate of all Rome. Very well, he finally said, his voice carrying the weight of the decision. I will pay the price. An enigmatic smile appeared on the Sibyl's face as she handed over the remaining 3 volumes. You have chosen wisely, Tarquin. These books should be kept in the Temple of Jupiter, consulted only in times of extreme need. Choose your guardians well, for the power contained in these pages can save as well as destroy. With these words, the Sibyl began to leave the hall. Her form seemed to dissolve into the shadows, like morning mist under the rising sun. Before disappearing completely, her last words echoed through the air. The fate of Rome is now in your hands. Use it wisely. Tarquin stood there, holding the 3 volumes, feeling their weight not only physically, but also mystically. Lucius approached cautiously, looking at the books with a mixture of fascination and awe. What shall we do now, my king? Now, replied Tarquin, his voice firm, but laden with a new responsibility. Now we begin to build the future of Rome. The next morning, Tarquin ordered the construction of a special chamber in the Temple of Jupiter to house the Sibylline books. As he watched the workers begin the work, his mind was still filled with the images of the previous day. The mystery of the Sibyl and the destruction of the 6 books haunted his thoughts. We need to establish a select group of guardians, said Lucius, who stood beside him like a faithful shadow. Men of unquestionable character, versed in the ancient languages and rituals. Duumviri Sacrorum, murmured Tarquin, the name appearing in his mind like a divine inspiration. 2 men chosen from the noblest patrician families, who will dedicate their lives to protecting and interpreting the books. News of the Sibyl's visit had already spread throughout Rome, growing and changing with each new report. In the taverns and markets, People whispered about the mysterious woman who had appeared before the king, some saying that she had turned into a dove and flown away, others swearing that she had dissolved into a cloud of golden light. While the city buzzed with rumors, Tarquin faced an even more crucial decision, the choice of the first duumvirate. After days of deliberation with his advisors, two names emerged: Marcus Attilius, a man known for his wisdom and devotion to the gods, and Gaius Veturius, a scholar respected for his knowledge of the ancient scriptures. On the day of the appointment ceremony, the temple of Jupiter was packed with dignitaries and priests. The air was heavy with incense and expectation. Marco and Gaius, dressed in white togas embroidered with gold thread, knelt before the altar. "You have been chosen," Tarquin proclaimed, his voice echoing off the marble columns, "to be the first guardians of the Sibylline books. This is not only an honor, but a sacred responsibility. Failure in your duty will be punishable by death." The two men took their solemn oaths, their voices firm despite the weight of the words. Soon after the ceremony, they were led into the newly built chamber, where the three books were waiting, emanating an aura of ancient power. Marco was the first to touch one of the volumes, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the yellowed pages. The characters seemed to dance before his eyes, alternating between known and unknown languages. "It's extraordinary," he whispered. "The words, they change according to the reader's needs." Caio, examining another volume, nodded in agreement. "It's as if the gods themselves had written these pages. Each prophecy seems to have multiple layers of meaning." Over the next few days, the two men immersed themselves in studying the sacred texts, establishing rituals and protocols for their consultation. They determined that the books should only be opened in times of extreme need, when Rome faced dangers that threatened its very existence. Tarquin watched everything with a mixture of pride and apprehension. There were times when he wondered if he had made the right choice in accepting the Sibyl's price, but then he remembered the look in her eyes, that supernatural certainty that Rome was destined for greatness. One afternoon, while he was supervising the final work in the book chamber, Lucius approached with disturbing news. "My king, there are rumors that some senators are questioning the authenticity of the books. They say you've been duped by a charlatan." The king laughed a humorless sound. "Let them talk, Lucius. When the first crisis comes, when we need the wisdom contained in these pages, they'll understand." As if to prove his words, that very night a tremor shook Rome. It was no ordinary earthquake. There was something supernatural in its nature. The sky took on a sickly greenish hue, and reports of strange omens began to arrive from all parts of the city. Marco and Caio were hastily summoned. Under the light of torches, they opened the first volume of the Sibylline books. The pages seemed to pulsate with a life of their own as the two men deciphered the ancient prophecies. "It's a warning," declared Marco, his voice trembling slightly. "The gods are displeased. A ritual has been neglected, a temple desecrated." Gaius continued reading, his fingers tracing the lines of the text. "Here, it speaks of a necessary sacrifice. A specific offering must be made to the god Vulcan to appease his wrath." Tarquin immediately ordered the rituals to be carried out according to the instructions in the books. For 3 days and nights, sacrifices were offered, prayers were chanted, and gradually the threatening signs began to diminish. The sky cleared, the tremors ceased, and a supernatural peace descended on Rome. This first test of the wisdom of the Sibylline books served to establish their authority definitively. The same senators who had doubted before now bowed in reverence before the sacred chamber. The position of the duumvirate was elevated to a new level of respect and influence. Mark and Gaius continued their meticulous work of study and preservation, aware that every word contained in the volumes could one day be the difference between the salvation and destruction of Rome. They established a system of controlled copies, ensuring that knowledge would not be lost even if something happened to the originals. Tarquin, for his part, began to see his own position in a new light. He wasn't just the king of Rome. He was the guardian of a divine legacy, the man who had granted the city access to the wisdom of the gods through the Sibylline books. At night, alone in his chambers, he often found himself thinking about the 6 lost books, wondering what precious knowledge had turned to ashes that fateful morning. But then he remembered the Sibyl's words. The fate of Rome is now in your hands. And he knew that, somehow, the 3 books that remained were exactly what Rome needed. The years that followed brought a new era of prosperity for Rome. The wisdom of the Sibylline books, under the watchful eye of the Duumviri, proved invaluable at several critical moments. Mark and Gaius had established a rigorous routine of study and meditation, dedicating their lives to understanding the sacred texts. One particularly cold morning, while fog still covered the 7 hills of Rome, a messenger arrived panting at the royal palace. A mysterious illness was spreading through the city's poorest neighborhoods, causing extremely high fevers and delirium in those affected. The doctors were perplexed, as no known treatment seemed to work. "We need to consult the books," declared Tarquin, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had already witnessed the power of the prophecies. Lucius, now with gray hairs at his temples, nodded in agreement. In the sacred chamber, Marco and Gaius were already poring over the volumes when the king arrived. The pages gave off a faint glow in the torchlight, and the air was heavy with the scent of burnt herbs that the guardians used in their protection rituals. "We found something," said Marco, his finger tracing invisible lines in the air as he read. "The disease is not natural. It's a punishment from Apollo, sent because an ancient sacred grove was desecrated during the city's latest expansions." Gaius added, "The books speak of a purification ritual that must be carried out at sunrise. We'll need 9 Vestal virgins, water from the sacred spring, and laurel branches picked at midnight." The ritual was prepared with meticulous attention to detail. The Vestals, in their immaculate white robes, formed a perfect circle on the spot where the sacred grove had been destroyed. When the first rays of sunlight touched the city, their voices rose in an ancient chant, words in a language that few still understood. The cure wasn't immediate, but in the days that followed, the sick began to recover. The fever subsided, the delirium ceased, and a sense of spiritual renewal pervaded all of Rome. The success of the ritual only further solidified the importance of the Sibylline books and their keepers. However, it wasn't all victory. One night, during a particularly violent storm, lightning struck one of the towers of the Temple of Jupiter, very close to the chamber of the books. The ensuing fire threatened to destroy the sacred texts, and it was only thanks to the quick action of Marcus and Gaius that the volumes were saved. This incident led to an important decision. New guardians had to be trained to ensure the continuity of sacred knowledge. After careful consideration, 2 young patricians were chosen as apprentices, Lucius Petilius and Titus Mantius. Training the new guardians proved to be a complex task. It wasn't just a question of learning to read the texts. The young men needed to develop a special sensitivity to interpret the multiple layers of meaning contained in the prophecies. "The books don't reveal their secrets easily," Marco explained to his apprentices. "Sometimes a single word can have 3 or 4 different interpretations, and choosing the wrong one can have disastrous consequences." During this period of transition, Rome faced a series of small crises that tested both the veteran guardians and their apprentices. There were signs in the sky that had to be interpreted, omens and sacrifices that demanded special attention, and even a brief period of drought that was resolved through specific rituals described in the books. Tarquin observed all this with growing satisfaction. His decision to buy the books of the Sibyl, even at such a high price, had proved to be one of the most important acts of his reign. However, in his moments of solitude, he was still haunted by the memory of the 6 burned volumes. One evening, while walking through the palace gardens, the king found Lucius gazing at the stars. "Sometimes I wonder," said the advisor, "if the burned books contained warnings about events yet to come, dangers against which we cannot now prepare ourselves." Tarquin considered the words for a moment before replying, "The Sibyl didn't do it by chance, my friend. Perhaps the 3 books we have left are exactly what we need. No more, no less." The wisdom contained in the Sibylline books began to influence not only religious decisions, but also practical aspects of the city's administration. Consultation of the sacred texts preceded important military decisions. the construction of new temples, and even the choice of dates for public celebrations. Mark and Gaius, realizing the growing responsibility that weighed on their shoulders, devoted themselves even more arduously to training their successors. They knew that the future of Rome depended on preserving not only the physical books, but also the tradition of interpretation that was being built. The books are like a deep river, Gaius would tell his apprentices. The surface may appear calm, but in the depths run powerful currents that can both nourish and destroy. Our task is to learn to swim in these waters without drowning in their mysteries. As the years went by, the influence of the Sibylline books grew deeper and deeper in Roman life. The apprentices Lucius Petilius and Titus Mullius progressed in their studies, absorbing not only the technical knowledge of the prophecies, but also the spiritual sensitivity necessary for their interpretation. One afternoon, while they were studying a particularly enigmatic passage, a tremor unlike any other ever felt shook Rome. It wasn't like the previous tremor they had experienced. This one seemed to come from the very bowels of the earth, accompanied by a low, prolonged sound that made the citizens shudder with fear. In the center of the city, a fissure opened up in the ground, growing larger by the hour. Panic began to spread as reports came in that poisonous fumes were emerging from the opening, killing birds flying too close and causing the surrounding plants to wither. Marco and Gaius immediately gathered in the sacred chamber, along with their apprentices. It was the first major crisis they would face together, a crucial test for the new generation of guardians. The pages of the books seemed more alive than ever, the letters pulsing with a supernatural urgency. Here, pointing out Tito Manlio, his finger trembling slightly over a page. The prophecy speaks of a portal to the underworld that will open when Rome is at its proudest. Lucius Petilius continued reading, and it says that only the city's most precious sacrifice will be able to seal the opening and prevent the forces of the underworld from contaminating the world of the living. The news quickly reached Tarquin, who called an emergency council. While they discussed the meaning of the most precious sacrifice, the crowd continued to grow, and a greenish mist began to spread through the nearby streets. It was then that Marcus Cocius, a young Roman knight known for his bravery and nobility, voluntarily presented himself before the council. The most precious thing Rome has, he declared, is not gold, nor jewels, nor temples. It's its young warriors willing to die for the city. Before anyone could stop him, Cocius mounted his most valuable horse, donned his shiniest armor, and in front of a stunned crowd, rode straight into the fissure. The sound of hooves beating against stone echoed for a moment, followed by a sepulchral silence. Then, with a deafening boom, the earth began to close in, sealing the young warrior's sacrifice. This event profoundly marked not only the city, but also the way in which the Sibylline books were viewed. The place where the rift closed was consecrated and became known as Lake Cocius in memory of the brave knight. For the apprentices, it was a powerful lesson in the weight of their responsibilities. Prophecies are not always clear, explained Gaius, but their consequences are always real and often irreversible. Marco, observing the development of his pupils, noticed a significant change in their attitudes. They finally understand, he commented to his companion, that we are not just scholars or priests. We are guardians of Rome's destiny. The atmosphere in the sacred chamber changed subtly after these events. The four men developed an even more rigorous routine of study and meditation. They began to create an elaborate system of notes and commentaries, recording not only the interpretations of the prophecies, but also the signs and omens that accompanied them. Tarquin, aged but still perceptive, realized that it was time to further institutionalize the role of the guardians. By his order, it was established that the duumviri would have a status equivalent to the highest priests in Rome, with the right to participate in all the important decisions of the state. The books are not just a spiritual guide, declared the king at a session of the Senate. They are the very anchor that keeps Rome connected to the gods. Each prophecy deciphered is a thread in the fabric of our city's destiny. As news of Cocius' sacrifice spread, pilgrims began arriving from all over Italy. eager to pay their respects at the spot where the young knight had given himself to save Rome. Many brought offerings and sought the wisdom of the guardians of the books. One day, while overseeing the cataloging of some minor prophecies, Lucius Petilius made an intriguing discovery. "Masters," he called out, his voice trembling with excitement, "I found something about the burnt books." Marco and Gaius quickly approached, followed by Tito Mantilius. In the text, there was a cryptic reference that suggested that the knowledge of the lost volumes was not completely lost. Somehow, echoes of their prophecies were interwoven in the 3 remaining books. "It's as if the books were a living organism," observed Tito, "adapting and preserving the most essential knowledge, even after the destruction of part of it all." This discovery led to a new phase of study, with the Guardians looking for patterns and connections that had previously gone unnoticed. They began to realize that some prophecies seemed to change subtly over time, revealing new layers of meaning as circumstances changed. The discovery of the echoes of the burnt books in the remaining pages brought a new dimension to the Guardians' work. Marco and Caio, now with gray hair and weathered faces, watched with satisfaction as their apprentices became worthy successors to their sacred legacy. One morning, as the first snow of winter covered Rome with its white mantle, a dark omen appeared in the skies. 3 eagles, symbols of Jupiter, were seen fighting over the temple, their feathers falling like rain on the sacred steps. The augurs interpreted the sign as a warning of great change to come. Lucius Petilius and Titus Mantius, now fully trained, immediately began consulting the Sibylline books. The pages seemed heavier than usual, as if fate itself were pressing against the ancient parchment. After hours of intense study, a prophecy emerged, clearer and more direct than usual. When pride becomes tyranny, when power corrupts justice, Rome will abandon its kings to embrace a new destiny. The prophecy caused quite a stir among the Guardians. It was the first time the books had spoken so explicitly about a political change. Mark and Gaius knew that they had to report the discovery to the king, but they also understood the danger that such a revelation could bring. When Tarquin received the news, he reacted with a mixture of anger and fear. His last years in power had been marked by growing authoritarianism, and rumors of discontent were already circulating among the patrician families. The prophecy seemed to confirm his worst fears. "Perhaps there is an error in the interpretation," suggested the king, his voice betraying his anxiety. "Consult the books again. There must be a way to avoid this fate." But the Guardians knew that the prophecies in the Sibylline books were not warnings that could be ignored or altered. They were glimpses into the fabric of fate, as inevitable as the sunrise. In the days that followed, more signs began to appear. Crows nesting in the royal palace, statues of the gods weeping blood, thunder on clear days. The tension in the city grew by the day. Tarquin's son, Sixtus, committed a terrible act against Lucrezia, a Roman noblewoman, triggering a series of events that would lead to the popular revolt led by Lucius Junius Brutus and Lucius Tarquin Collatine. In the midst of the ensuing chaos, the Guardians of the books faced their greatest challenge: preserving the sacred text during the political transition. While the angry mob marched against the royal palace, Marco and Gaius organized a secret operation to transfer the books to a safe place. "The books do not belong to any king or form of government," Marco declared to his apprentices. "They belong to Rome, and our duty is to protect them for future generations." During a moonless night, the 4 Guardians, aided by a small group of Vestals, transported the sacred volumes through underground tunnels to a secret sanctuary in the depths of the Temple of Vesta. The site had been prepared weeks before, when the first signs of the revolution began to appear. The fall of the monarchy was swift and decisive. Tarquin and his family were expelled from Rome, marking the end of the Age of Kings and the beginning of the Republic. In the midst of the political transformation, a new order needed to be established for the safekeeping of the Sibylline books. The newly formed Roman Senate, recognizing the importance of the sacred texts, expanded the number of guardians from 2 to 10, creating the Decemvirii Sacris Faciundis. This expansion reflected not only the need for greater protection for the books, but also the new political structure of the Republic, which was more inclusive and representative. Marco and Gaius, although already elderly, oversaw the transition and the training of the new guardians. Their last lessons to their successors were full of wisdom accumulated over decades of service. "The books are like Rome," said Marco in his final speech. "Eternal, but constantly changing. Each generation must learn to interpret them according to its time, but always maintaining the sacred essence of their purpose." The prophecy about the end of the monarchy had been fulfilled, but the Guardians knew it was just one of thousands contained in the ancient volumes. The pages continued to pulsate with a life of their own, holding secrets and revelations that would guide Rome through the centuries to come. Years later, when the Republic was firmly established, it was discovered that the Sibyl had predicted not only the fall of the kings, but also the greatness that Rome would achieve under its new form of government. The 3 books that remain proved sufficient to guide the city through its transformations, confirming the mysterious wisdom behind the prophetess' actions. The Sibylline books continued to be consulted at the most critical moments in Roman history, their prophecies echoing through the centuries like a golden thread weaving the fate of the eternal city. And so Tarquin's decision to buy the last 3 volumes, although it indirectly contributed to his own downfall, ensured the survival and greatness of Rome far beyond his reign. The story of the Books of Destiny has become a living legend, passed down from generation to generation, reminding everyone that true power lies not in political authority, but in the ancient wisdom that guides the steps of humanity through the ages.